So I think looking out in the audience, about a third of the faces have been to Crete with me on field work. There's quite a lot of undergraduates and master students here. So, but for those who haven't and who don't know where Crete is, this is where Crete is located in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Eastern Mediterranean is, and the Mediterranean in general, the Mediterranean basin, is an area of concern for future climate changes. It is getting hotter, it's projected to get even hotter, and it's going to get drier. It's with less overall moisture availability for Crete. So Mediterranean summers are hot, dry. That makes them attractive to millions of visitors who like to go there for their holidays. It's one of my family members there doing some early research on ancient civilizations. But that dry climate that is attractive for summer holidays also makes it vulnerable to droughts and wildfires, as illustrated dramatically in 2021 with the fires on Evia, and then again this year with the fires on Rhodos, etc. The flip side of these dry summers is a high seasonality and precipitation in the winter. So most Mediterranean rainfall occurs in the winter, can also occur in the summer, especially the late summer through tropical style downpours. When the rainfall intersects and interacts with the mountainous topography in Crete, that can lead to really dramatic flash floods. This was a flood in October 2022, which was the first of 4 fieldwork seasons or fieldwork trips that we've taken to Crete since then. So we were caught in this on the last day of our fieldwork, driving down from the mountains with the mountain roads progressively turning into rivers under the car wheels. Several people actually, there were several fatalities in this event, but we were okay. We got through it with some damage to the rental car. I'd like to say it's the first time that I've returned a rental car with damage, but everyone knows that would be a lie. So the Mediterranean also supports these highly productive agro-pastoral systems that have supported human civilizations since the Neolithic. This is an example of ancient terraces in the Aegean. But these agro-pastoral systems are vulnerable to climate change, to drought, to wildfires, and that could impact the ancient societies that depend on these systems. So climatic influence on ancient civilizations in the Eastern Mediterranean has long been subject of debate and research, but in recent years, there's been a number of dramatic breakthroughs using super high resolution paleoclimatic archives based on tree rings and stalagmites. These are the archives that can give us the insights into climatic change on the scale of a single human lifetime. So drought through these archives has been implicated now in the collapse or the decline, societal overturn of the Akkadian Empire, 4.2 thousand years before present, and the Hittite Empire around 3.2 thousand years before present at the end of the Bronze Age. So there's a number of ways that we can use the geological record or use different archives to reconstruct past climate. Lake sedimentary records and ocean sediment records, I've worked on those a lot. A lot of people here in Birmingham work on sediment records. We can use ice cores. But outside of the polar regions, if we want to look at these very human high-resolution timescales, we really have to use stalagmites and tree rings because of their annual layering and the way that they can be dated so accurately. So tree rings, stalagmites are what we need if we want to look at climatic change on human historical, prehistorical timescales. But the interesting thing is that Crete is a real data gap here. This shows the current records, stalagmites, tree rings, and in purple lake level records for the Eastern Mediterranean. And there's a clear spatial data gap for Crete. And Crete is central, and it's of central importance if we want to understand the development of ancient societies in this area. It's central geographically. This map shows This is a summary of archaeological evidence for trade and trade routes in the Bronze Age. So Crete is central here, it's connected and it's trading with all these different societies and kingdoms around the Eastern Mediterranean. It's trading directly and it's trading indirectly with the Silk Road network. So glass beads, lapis lazuli, ivory are being imported from Central Asia. Because this is the Bronze Age, and bronze is an ally of copper and tin, we have tin that is coming all the way from mines in Afghanistan and perhaps even as far as the mines in Cornwall as well. Cyprus is the place where the copper ore is coming from. Cyprus, the word Cyprus is actually derived from the ancient word for copper. Cyprus in many ways is the, if you like, the kind of the Saudi Arabia of this time. It's sitting on this huge extractive wealth. What we know about the Cretan societies, the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, is they didn't have a lot of extractive wealth. They exported some timber, but they're mostly exporting finished products, wool textiles, lamps and vases, fine pottery, ceremonial weapons, etc. And in many ways, this Bronze Age society has been compared to the modern day, and it's an interesting analog for the modern day. It's this highly competitive, interconnected trading network, much like our modern globalized society. They are interdependent, they're competitive, they're sometimes coming into conflict. This on the left-hand side shows a network diagram, connections between all of these different ancient civilizations, societies in the Bronze Age. We know, we know about how they were trading and talking to each other from a diverse range of sources. So, for example, this famous Ulubaran shipwreck, which contained enough copper and tin ingots to make bronze armor for an entire army, and even letters, which really humanize the relationships between these different actors at this time. So, for example, the Mari letters, which were recovered from a site on the border of Iraq and Syria. This lists objects that are being imported from Crete, including gold weapons encrusted with lapis lazuli, and leather sandals, a pair of leather sandals that were given to King Hammurabi of Babylon, but which were returned. Apparently, he wasn't happy with them. We don't know why. They were too small, they were too last millennium in style, or whatever. It's unknown. Another example is the Sinaru text. Again, this is from northern Syria, to the king of Ugarit, and this is exempting a ship and a trader, a private merchant coming from Crete. And it states, this son of Signiu, his grain, his beer, his olive oil, to the palace he shall not deliver. His ship is exempt when it arrives from Crete. And this is thought to be perhaps the earliest example of corporate tax exemption in history. So as I said, many parallels with our modern world. So as well as being central to this dynamic Bronze Age society and subsequent civilizations, Crete is central to European mythology and the stories, the oldest stories that Europe tells about itself. So in Greek mythology, Crete is the birthplace of Zeus. He's hidden in a cave. It's the home of the palace of King Minos. So Minos angers Zeus, and then he's punished by Zeus. He makes his wife Persephone fall in love with a bull. They have an offspring, the half man, half bull Minotaur, who Minos gets Daedalus, master craftsman, to imprison in the labyrinth. The Athenians have to send 7 young men, 7 young women every 9 years to be sacrificed until Theseus, with the help of Ariadne, kill the Minotaur. And Daedalus, who was this master craftsman, and his son Icarus are imprisoned in the labyrinth by Minos, who's angry with them. They build wings to escape, fly too close to the sun, and Icarus dies, etc., etc. That's only, there's many, you can go incredibly deep with Greek mythology on Crete, but it is central. Beyond mythology, in terms of the reality of ancient human societies, Crete is also central. It is home of the oldest European civilization, named the Minoans by the British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans. This is the modern-day ruins, partially reconstructed by Arthur Evans, controversially reconstructed on the right-hand side. This is a graphical representation from the Assassin's Creed computer game. View of Knossos set during the classical Greek times, so 500 years after the end of the Minoan civilization. And Evans is he's looking for the fabled Palace of King Minos. That's why this civilization is called the Minoans. Probably, we don't really know exactly what they called themselves, but the Egyptians called them the Keftiu, which may be closer to the reality. And when I talk about the word civilization in this context, it can be a loaded word, but here, and when I talk about Europe, I mean the modern political boundaries of Europe. So the ancient Minoans, the Bronze Age Cretans, didn't think of themselves as European. They were looking south, they were looking east in the way they were trading, so that's a modern definition. Civilization is not used to convey notions of Western superiority, but to denote urban populations, frequent foreign trade, art, public building, state systems, a system of writing, etc., to differentiate it from the Neolithic. Okay, so the Minoans are there's a lot of mystique still around this first European civilization. We have not translated their Linear A writing system, so we don't know what is in those texts. There's not enough of these texts in enough context. There's no Rosetta Stone. It remains untranslated. So what we know about them comes from the archaeological context and their artwork and their frescoes. So we know that they had a liberal fashion sense. We know that their favorite pastime was bull leaping, and the bull has huge significance on Crete. It's probably this symbology that leads to the legend of the Minotaur subsequently, etc. Their artwork is defined by incredible sophistication, and natural scenes, vibrant natural scenes, are really celebrated in their pottery and their frescoes. Women are foregrounded in Minoan art. Several famous examples: the Blue Ladies and the so-called La Parisienne frescoes. And it seems that the structure of Minoan society was more egalitarian and less hierarchical than some other societies at that time. So there is no clear evidence for kings or queens, no godlike pharaoh king. It may be that they were much more egalitarian. And certainly women foregrounded in scenes such as these, and they may have played a prominent role in their administration. Certainly there was many women are foregrounded as priestesses, and there are many female goddesses, including the poppy seed goddess and the rather intense snake goddess. So how have they organized their society? Until we translate Linear A, we won't really know, but however they organized it, what's beyond doubt is they generally prospered for 1,500 years. And they built densely populated and built habitations all over Crete. So that includes the 5 so-called palace complexes, 5 or 6 depending on how you define them, but certainly the largest being Knossos, which we saw in the previous slide, Festos here in the south, Malia, Gornia, Zakros. It's likely that these weren't, it's a misnomer to think of them as royal palaces. They're probably more centers for collecting, redistributing agricultural products, centers of religious performance, administrative centers. As well as these, but we'll call them palaces or palace complexes because that's generally what they're known as. So as well as these large palace complexes, they also built, they had peak sanctuaries, and they had cave sites as well, which they performed occult rituals, if you like. So the work on these palace complex sites has really captured the imagination since the early part of the 20th century. And it was part of a race part of an archaeological race between European powers. So the British with Sir Arthur Evans worked on Knossos, the French on Marlia, the Italians on Festos, and so on. And now in hindsight, some of this has kind of disturbing colonial overtones. So Arthur Evans, highlighted by Sir Arthur Evans here, saying, "I'm determined on the archaeological conquest of this island." And much of this work was done. It was done in a competitive way. It was done in a rush. They plowed down, they dug down through the layers to get to the archaeological remains. They paid the digging teams bounties, so they weren't collecting stuff carefully. And also, the local expertise and input was not properly acknowledged. So this is Minos Kalakarinos, who was a local businessman and amateur archaeologist who first uncovered evidence for the site of Knossos, which was underneath a mound of earth. It was under a hill. He found these clusters of gold coins. He started doing some digging and uncovered one of the so-called throne rooms and uncovered 12 of these huge pithoi. But then Arthur Evans buys the land using his family fortune, plows his family fortune into the subsequent work of the digs. And really, Minos is pushed to one side. He's not really acknowledged at all. He has like one line in all of the journal articles and the memoirs that are written up afterwards. Now, they rather poignantly, they have statues which face across from each other at Knossos, and that local expertise is acknowledged now. That type of helicopter science is the antithesis of the project development that we are doing now in Crete. So we've been working with local partners for many, many years. And every step of everything that we're doing is working with local Greeks. So too many to mention, but foremost would be Professor Yorgos Ilopoulos from the University of Patras, Michaelis Spiridakis from the local Euphrates of Antiquities, and also Maria Kolendrianou, who is the local UNESCO World Heritage Geopark in Palaeoclimatic, and many, many others. So something that is fascinating when it comes to the context of these ancient societies in Crete is these major settlements. This is Festos, surrounded by this now dry plain and olive groves, were established in dry, water-scarce sites. So unlike the ancient Egyptians, Sumerians, Akkadians, or the Shang dynasty in China, other Bronze Age cultures, the Minoans and subsequent societies did not have access to large-scale freshwater systems like the Nile, the Tigris, Euphrates, Yellow River, etc. So how did they do it? Well, the importance of storing and transferring water is very apparent in the archaeological record of Crete. I want to take a minute to break down or to go through this slide here, because we're going to have a look at this timeline. So in this, on the left-hand side, we have a timeline of the ancient societies and civilizations that have occupied Crete, the Minoans, who you're familiar with, and then the subsequent societies here. On the far left are recognized climatic events from the broader region of the Northern Hemisphere, and a number of important archaeological or historical events: the Minoan palace fires, Bronze Age collapse, the 365 Roman earthquake, etc. And on the right-hand side here are examples from the archaeological record of the importance of water storage and management. So I've introduced you to the Minoan society, but the Minoans, it also turns out, were pioneers when it comes to water management. So this shows the remains of a Minoan dam at Syra, which is a small town here, and a small island off the main island of Crete, Syra Island. This dam is of remarkable sophistication, really incredibly advanced in its design. They also had covered aqueducts and cisterns. What I'll do now is just I'll step through the other civilizations and societies that are of interest subsequent to the Minoans. So after the Minoans, we have the Mycenaeans. So these are the Greeks of Homer, here are the heroes of the Trojan War. There's a very active debate within the archaeological community on the relationship between Minoan society and Mycenaean. So one school of thought is that the Mycenaeans, who were certainly more warlike, do they come in and aggressively, violently displace the Minoans? Or was that actually more of a merger and between these two civilizations? That's the other school of thought, with Knossos, in fact, consolidating and expanding its power. That's still being researched, that's still up for debate, but by the time that Homer is writing his story of the siege of Troy with this collection of Greek tribes, King Idomeneus of Crete is providing 80 ships to this expeditionary force, and at this point the Cretans are not distinct or Minoan, they are part of this Mycenaean collective. At the end of the Bronze Age, the Mycenaeans are displaced from Crete, and all of these civilizations, one by one in the Eastern Mediterranean Fertile Crescent area, are displaced or disappear, apart from the Egyptians, who remain but in a weakened state. This is an interesting area of active archaeological debate. So this is a bas-relief scene from Medinet Habu, which illustrates the Egyptian campaign against the people from northern countries, the Battle of the Delta, or the Sea Peoples during the reign of Ramesses III. So these Sea Peoples are external invasive force that are mentioned in a number of different contexts across the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean. The collapse of this interconnected trading network in the end of the Bronze Age is extremely dramatic and unique, really. It's illustrated dramatically at a human level, again through some letters between the different kings. So this is a letter from Ugarit, which is a northern port city in Syria, pleading for help. When your messenger arrived, the army was humiliated and the city was sacked. Our food in the threshing floors was burnt and the vineyards were also destroyed. Our city is sacked, may you know it, may you know it. So there was certainly external conflict at that time, but there is also debate over the role of seismicity, of earthquakes, and of internal rebellions. Just destabilizing effect of technological change. That iron is starting to come in, which is a cheaper way of making weaponry than bronze. But drought has also been implicated, and with this most recent work, just last year, we know that there was an unusually severe continuous dry period recorded in tree rings in Turkey during the time of the Bronze Age collapse. So after this Bronze Age collapse, we go into the Dark Ages, the Greek Dark Ages. There's no writing. And there's the Dorian people that occupy Crete retreat to defensible hilltop positions. And major towns are built on the tops of hills, but they're also building these water systems. They're still having to manage and store water. After the Dorians, we have the Greek city-state, the Hellenistic period, and then the Romans, who really take on the challenge of water management on Crete. They take it on in a spectacular way. So this is Gortyn, which was the largest Roman city on Crete, one of the most important in the whole of the Roman Empire, southern part of their empire. They built a 20-kilometer long aqueduct from Zaros in the mountains to bring spring water. The aqueduct is not there anymore, but the foundations are there. And they were bringing fresh spring water to Gortyn and distributing it through a public water system. So people can have fresh spring water from over 20 different public drinking fountains. There's examples of huge scale water management all over Roman Crete. So this is the huge water systems at Aptra. And finally, after the Roman Empire, the collapse of the Roman Empire, we have Byzantine and Arab Crete, Venetian Crete, Ottoman, and modern Crete. Venetian Crete is interesting. Crete was a very important part of the Venetian Empire. The Venetians often built their settlements or their fortifications on top of the old Roman fortifications. It becomes interesting, Venetians become interesting from a paleoclimatic perspective because they had detailed documentary records. And we know there's evidence that there was adverse climatic conditions that the Venetians faced during the Little Ice Age 200 years ago. So I'm coming back to this slide here to emphasize the challenge that we have for Crete. Hopefully, I've convinced you that it has this uniquely rich archaeological history. I mean, I would argue more archaeological value per square kilometer than anywhere probably in Europe, although you know, a Roman might argue with me. But okay, so what's being done to address this challenge? So in recent years, there's been a number of lake records that have been published just in the last few years. So there's two natural lakes on Crete, Lake Cornas here and Lake Votimos. From Lake Cornas, there's been a full Holocene detailed palynological record published, so a record of pollen, vegetation change, and also microcharcoal, which is beginning to give us some fascinating insights. And also a much shorter record of a paleo lake next to Festos, this second largest of the palace complexes in the south of Crete, just published in the last few years. So on the left-hand side is some of the data from the Lake Cornas record. The x-axis here is the Holocene, so this is the modern day. This is going back 10,000 years. I'll just pick out a few of the lines of data here. So this green record here, this green line is the proportion of olive pollen. So olive gets introduced here in the Neolithic, and then it kicks up again in Hellenistic and Roman times. So some fascinating insights into cultivation. This Festos here is now surrounded by this dried basin. If you dig down into the basin, as the people that did this work, you get to a layer of lake sediments that are dated to the Bronze Age. So I've summarized this data here on the left-hand side. This shows an active lake at Festos during the late Bronze Age. Then it becomes a peat and dries up, becomes a swamp, and then it disappears completely. And these two records highlight, I've replotted the most interesting lines of evidence, I think, for climate, which is microcharcoal interpreted as a fire proxy, so more fire showing up on the right-hand side, and this sedimentary record of flood events, so more floods being peaks towards the right. So it's fascinating that this lake dries up at the end of the Bronze Age. Is that driven by climate, or is it suggestive of something else? Were the Minoans and the Mycenaeans actively managing and creating a reservoir at this site, and were they doing it at other sites? We've found this incredibly sophisticated dam in a very small settlement at Sierra. If they had that technology, why would they not also be applying that to their larger settlements? So these flood and fire events oscillate or change on centennial to millennial timescales. Interestingly, some of the biggest peaks and troughs are throughout the Bronze Age and the Classical period. It seems to be wetter. If these flood events are a proxy for how wet it is, it's much wetter during the Classical Greek times, and it dries throughout Hellenistic and Roman times, which is interesting. But fundamentally, these lake archives, so they're giving us some tantalizing insights, are going to be limited by low temporal resolution compared to what we need to obtain from stalagmites and tree rings if we want to make inferences at a human timescale and an archaeological timescale. So this is illustrated here by two age models. The right-hand side, this is time, 5,400 years before present, 3,400. Each one of these X symbols is a uranium thorium date. This is an age model from the stalagmite collected in Iran that was used to date accurately the increase in dust flux from the Akkadian region at 4.3 thousand years before present. The 25 of these uranium thorium dates through the Bronze Age. So that's one date every 60 years. Whereas in the Lake Cornas record, lake records, for example, this is a good age model from the early Holocene. Okay, there's a hiatus here, but this is reliable. It runs through the Holocene. It runs through the Bronze Age, but there's only 3 radiocarbon dates through the whole of the Bronze Age, one every 650 years. So that's why if you want to be able to say with confidence that this drought event or this series of wildfires or whatever were impacting this civilization at this time, we need stalagmites and tree rings. Fortunately, Crete has thousands of recorded caves, many decorated with these candle-shaped stalagmites that are optimal for doing paleoclimatic work. Also has ancient cypress trees, which can live for up to 1,000 years. So the type of questions that this project is addressing now, and is going to address over the next few years, is for the Bronze Age, we're asking how did they manage water? Did they experience adverse multi-decadal climatic events, floods, droughts, wildfires? Did the termination of the Green Sahara, which is something that we know happened 5,500 years before present, how did that impact locally the climate on Crete? This happens exactly at the dawn of the Minoan civilization. It must have had a significant change in climate on Crete at that time. It must have had some impact. Did they experience droughts during the 4.2 event? It seems that they not impacted at that time, that they are resilient to the impacts that this event, if it did occur on Crete, did they have marked resilience to it through their water management? It led to the Akkadian collapse. And did climatic events act as a threat multiplier to destable Minoan and Mycenaean societies later towards the latter part of the Bronze Age? So, for example, during the eruption of Thera, Santorini, which is rather dramatically illustrated here, that leads to a huge tsunami, which we know causes a lot of damage in northern Crete. What was happening to climate at that time? There's evidence of famine, even the cannibalization occurs after this event. Was that made worse by climatic events? Even using the records of stalagmites distributed across Crete to look at the chemical signatures of the ash fallout from Santorini is something that we can do as well, to see the direct impact of ashfall on different parts of Crete. For later civilizations, we're interested in a number of different questions, but was it relatively wet and humid during the classical Greek city-states, as it appears to be for the Greek Peloponnese from the records that we have there? Mentioned that the Romans built a series of spectacular aqueducts and public water fountains on Crete. And was that partly in response to a climate that had been drying since classical Greek times? What was climate like during the medieval Little Ice Age? There's documentary evidence for adverse climate during this period. Letters from the dukes of Crete back to their imperial authorities in Venice describe increased winter and spring drought, exceptionally severe winters and summer rain, and the economic effects of these include loss of crops, soil, animals, damage to buildings, and inability to pay taxes. So our work has included 4 fieldwork seasons since October 2022, working with our local Greek partners, exploring caves, collecting stalagmites and starting to section them, look at the stratigraphy, starting to get some initial dates. This shows that our initial stalagmite stratigraphy from the first handful of stalagmites that we collected in October 22, initially working in the Western Crete has been our initial focus, and we're going to move east in subsequent campaigns. But the dating that we've already obtained shows that we can at minimum get a composite overlapping stratigraphy for the Holocene for the last 10,000 years. But some of the stalagmites that we just collected in June and are being sectioned now look like a single stalagmite may be able to cover the whole of the Holocene. We're also undertaking archaeological prospecting work. So I got a discipline hopping grant from NERC earlier in the year, where we've been working with our Greek partners to think about ways that we can explore these sites here highlighted in blue, where they believe that based on GIS evidence, ground observations of building stones, that the Minoans were doing larger scale hydrological engineering at these sites. So the chance to combine this kind of archaeology with state-of-the-art climate paleoclimate records is really exciting. Two of our collaborators have been developing tree ring records for a number of years. So Anastasia Christiopoulou, Thomas Vasny have been running a Cretan tree ring project. They investigated a whole range of tree species and found that the Mediterranean cypress is the species that will give the best tree ring records. So this figure here on the right-hand side shows their composite chronology. So this is overlapping tree ring records consolidated into one continuous record showing tree ring width for the last 900 years. And so they find that the tree ring width is responding to a combination of early summer and summer temperature and precipitation. The relative effect of precipitation and temperature is hard to separate out, but that is something that we think we can do using delta 18O oxygen isotopes of the cellulose. That's more of a proxy for water availability. So using this, focused on specific intervals, we think we'll be able to get a real state-of-the-art record for the last 1,000 years of drought water availability. And then we want to over that 1,000-year tree ring record with a longer-term records from the stalagmites. So in June 2023, we went into a series of newly discovered cave chambers. We were able to take dissertation students and master's students with us. The series of photos, we were accompanied by an artist from De Montfort who's collaborating with us as well. The full range of these photos is available on my webpage. This is Chloe Snowling, who is a PhD student I'm co-supervising at Northumbria. And we also had Dimitra join us, who's a PhD student, Greek-American, who's just started now in October to work on this project as well. So here we are with Yorgos exploring these cave chambers. This stalagmite here was actively dripping. We're very excited about this and some other stalagmites that we collected that look like they're going to cover the whole of the Holocene in a single specimen. We emplaced monitors to monitor drip rate, temperature, relative humidity, carbon dioxide. These kind of measurements need to be made over several years. That really allows you to calibrate and quantify and get much more reliable reconstructions of temperature or precipitation from the place where the stalagmite was collected. So press-ganged family as well as dissertation students and master students into going into these caves to collect this monitoring equipment. It's got to be done frequently to replace the batteries, etc. As well as the high resolution work that we want to do on the tree rings and stalagmites, we still, these lake records provide a plethora of information. And so we're going to revisit those and tackle them with biomarker analysis, isotopic work, and ancient DNA approaches. As well as the cave sediments, as well as the lake sediments, many of these caves that we're working in contain thick sequences of cave sediments, which also contain a lot of climate information and also paleontological information on changes in fauna. So finally, we're also fortunate enough to have made some new archaeological finds in this work that we were doing. We were going there to look for stalagmites to collect them for paleoclimate work. But in June, we found this archaeological site. It's not been reported at all before, so deep into one of these caves in the mountains. We were crawling around looking for stalagmites, and we noticed that this feature on the cave floor that looked like it was a bit of the ceiling that had collapsed in. The more we looked at it, the more it looked like it was a can. It was something that had been built up by hand. And then if you looked around this feature, which interestingly is situated just in front of this large dome-shaped stalagmite with these small stalagmites, white stalagmites growing on it, which looks very much like it has the appearance of an altar, but it's a natural feature. So the juxtaposition of these was fascinating. And it was also in a kind of a part of the cave that was like a natural, almost like a natural theater type shape with banking around it. So you can imagine, once we could see this, we could imagine easily that it was being used for ritual purposes. all around this part of the cave was fragments of pottery. And it was hard to see, and it hasn't been discovered till now because it's mostly overgrown with flowstone. So the calcium carbonate that forms the stalagmites has grown over this site and protected it. And the little bits of pottery that did fall out look extremely pristine. So the lamps and the pottery that we've seen so far are Roman. So it's Roman in age, but it may be, there may be something older underneath it as well. So we could speculate, what was this? Was this a shrine to a god of the underworld, Pluto, etc.? We don't know, but we want to do archaeological excavations on this. And so with that, I'll say thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.